10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Extreme radio for extreme times. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman. AM 640.
Hi, and welcome to A View from Space. I'm the guy they call the Spaceman. I'd like to welcome you in if you're driving around town right now or listening at home on AM 640. I welcome you in. Or if you're checked into Star Choice on Channel 865, I welcome you in also. And if you're listening on your 3G phone using the Stream the World software, I welcome you in. Or if you're at what they call the best seat in the house to check out A View from Space, logged on to 640toronto.com, picking up the live audio streaming, I welcome you in. Wherever you are in the world, I welcome you in. What an incredible week this has been. If you'll recall, almost a month ago now, seems quite a while ago, it's not quite a month, but it's almost a month ago, that STS Flight 127 was about to take off. The date for liftoff was to be July 13th. Yes, a 13 day. And of course, I came on A View from Space on AM 640 and remarked that it's going to be quite a squeeze, because if the July 13th launch is not a go, what would happen is there would be a moon rocket to send a moon orbiter around the moon, instead of having the International Space Station get up to its record number of people in space. I'll get to that number in just a moment, but if you're a regular listener to AM 640 and A View from Space, you know exactly the number that I'm talking about that is above us right now. So what happened was the sun cult and the moon cult were sharing Cape Canaveral up until the moon cult won out and the International Space Station was put on hold with its record crowd going into space. And a further couple of more times the flight was delayed, and it just took off this past Wednesday. And it did not dawn on me until last week that they were stalling on purpose. There was, in fact, a clash with the sun cult and the moon cult, both trying to launch their space vehicles into orbit. But this jived with the 40th anniversary of the man, Neil Armstrong, first setting foot on the moon. This past Wednesday was the day that they lifted off from Cape Canaveral, Apollo 11. It's the 40th anniversary week. So now that the International Space Station has accepted its STS-127 flight, just a few more left, by the way. I believe there's only 8 left now in the shuttle program, and it closes down. There's a crowd in space. Above us right now, approximately 220 miles directly above us, are 13 people. 13 is, of course, if you dabbled in numerology or checked out A View from Space on AM 640, you know that 13 is the number for reincarnation. That is brought back to life after a death, which was exactly what Apollo 13 was about. It was astronauts brought back to life from death. I'll get to that if I have time tonight, but Apollo 11 tonight, and the 40th anniversary is, of course, the focus on tonight's View from Space on AM 640. When these 7 astronauts of Space Shuttle Endeavour docked yesterday, Friday afternoon, with the 6 crewmen in the International Space Station, they set a record for the number of space flyers together in the heavens. So they have connected the heavens, man, and reincarnation with Isis, which is the nickname for the International Space Station. And of course, Isis in the Egyptian mythology is the mother of Horus and the sister wife of Osiris, the sun god, the original sun god, which is what this is all about. The station had only 6 crew members since May and should continue to have 6 more people on board at any time for the rest of its operational life. Endeavour docked at the station as the 2 craft passed about 220 miles above the Australian coast. The space station is not very far from Earth. They don't have to travel very far. Yet the Illuminati-controlled media are constantly showing shuttle liftoffs like it was the first. It would be tantamount now to basically showing every Boeing 767 that takes off from runways around the world. Not that interesting, and we've seen it before, over and over and over. But you see, it's a form of brainwashing and ritualizing this incredible drama of black magic that is happening above us in the so-called heavens. A little while later, after the Endeavour docked, the hatches were opened. The 7 shuttle astronauts floated into the space station one by one and embraced their 6 station colleagues. It was a bit of a mob scene, a floating jumble of dark shirts, beige pants, and shorts and white socks. "Welcome," said the station's commander, the Russian cosmonaut Gennady Padalka. 13's a pretty big number, but it's going to be an outstanding visit for us, says the shuttle commander, Mark Polanski, the American. "We're just thrilled to be here. Besides being the biggest space gathering ever, it's the most diverse. There's 7 Americans, a couple of Russians, a couple of Canadians, 1 Japanese, and 1 Belgian. 12 men, because after all, this is a tribute to Osiris, is it not, the sun god, the male side of things, and 1 woman, to represent Isis. There's 4 medical doctors aboard and several pilots to round things out. The shuttle is there to deliver a part of a Japanese laboratory known as Kibu. I don't believe that for one moment. I believe they're actually putting up some incredible software in there that's going to really affect our lives. And this software is going to be used, and hardware is going to be used in the next few years. It's incredible technology. I believe they're putting up machinery that will allow them to turn the skies into motion picture screens above some of the most famous cities in the world when they do their alien encounter. There's a whole bunch more to it, too, which I will get into, not on tonight's show, but on other ones that will be in the future. Incredible technology is now beginning to emerge so that mind control is not just in its infancy stages, but is now into its most invasive, all-encompassing position that it's ever been in before. And I believe that when they put this hardware and software into action, there are going to be many, many people that will be fooled, totally disillusioned at what the real truth is and the incredible fake images they're seeing above their heads. This is a Spaceman on a View from Space on AM 640. Just getting started. Let's get into the 40th anniversary of the flight of Apollo 11 and man's first steps on the moon.
Extreme radio for extreme times. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on AM 640.
You can email me at, I have two addresses, space@640toronto.com or spaceman@640toronto.com. Thanks for the ones I've already received. I appreciate that so much. A couple of things before I get into Apollo 11 flight details. The 13 astronauts right now at the International Space Station. It looks as though Endeavour has got the same old problem that scared everybody with Columbia, the space shuttle that blew up with some of the pieces of debris that broke loose from the large orange external fuel tank. This debris, of course, is not unusual. Endeavour landed in fine shape at the end of a flight in 2007 after mission managers spent a lot of their mission debating whether to do anything about a damaged tile near the shuttle's tail. But there is that to look forward to when they return, to give you a little bit of drama and to keep your eyes peeled on it, because isn't that the way with the shuttle? They like to suck you in on the liftoff and, bringing it back, are they going to make it? Which, of course, everybody gets kind of interested in and starts to check it out. Brainwashing. They're just grabbing your mind, grabbing your attention and saying, come here. I want to program your head. And that's what they've been doing. The media is so powerful. It's now become a weapon. Against us, not for us, against us. I don't believe for a moment they could have landed anything on the moon and convinced a single soul on this planet unless there was television, unless there were pictures, unless they had the video evidence. And I'll talk about the video evidence in a moment, the refurbished moon videos that are coming out. Oh, this is one incredible story, but let me just back up here with the International Space Station. Liftoff delayed 6 times. Launch was Wednesday, July 15th. It was a 13-day. 1 and 5 are 6. July is the 7th month. 6 and 7 are 13. It was a 13-day on the launch. Mission is going to be 16 days. That's a double 8, the sun worshippers' number of 8. And if you will check any of the footage that launches the Saturn V rocket that carried Apollo 11 to the moon, you will see clearly the number 8 distinctly printed on one part of the rocket as it leaves the launch pad on launch pad number 39A in Cape Canaveral. It was also the 23rd, that very important Illuminati number of 23. It's the 23rd flight of Endeavour. It's the 29th mission to the International Space Station in all. That makes it a hidden 11. And it is, they say, approximately 220 statute miles above us, which isn't very far. If I said it was from Toronto to Timmins, I'm broadcasting from Ontario, Canada, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Most of my local listeners would realize what a short distance that is. But just think of your last road trip and the 220 kilometers. It's not that far. And it's not that big a deal. It's called low Earth orbit, and that's exactly where the International Space Station is. As a matter of fact, it still is heavily affected by Earth's gravity because it has to occasionally be lifted by rockets back up into its orbit again because it simply starts to fall. And as you know, skydivers will fall, but they don't look or feel like they're falling, but they are actually falling, and that's exactly what's happening with the International Space Station. 220 miles is just a short little trip. The date of Apollo 11's liftoff was July 16th, a 88, the sun worshippers' number. The high occult event-filled year for the Illuminati of 1969. Let me give you an idea of what happened in 1969. There was Woodstock in August. They lifted off in July. And then in December it was Altamont with the Rolling Stones and the killing there. And also the Beatles had a very, very, very... well, it was the end of their career, which I will get into a little bit later on near the conclusion of tonight's show on A View from Space on AM 640. And it all ties in with, yes, the moonwalker, Michael Jackson, who has been on the media, the Illuminati-controlled media, incessantly for a couple of weeks. There's also the Beatle catalog. Hope I can get to it later. It's only 7 months since NASA made a bold decision to send Apollo 8 all the way to the moon on the first manned flight of the massive Saturn V rocket. The name chosen for the vehicle to power it, Saturn, by the way, it's a code for Satan, and the letter V is the original mark of Cain, later mirrored, and forms an X, or cross, the mark of Cain. An X, you see, is just merely 2 V's. If you put one V, turn it upside down and put it underneath the other one as if it was in a mirror image, you see the V forms an X. Winston Churchill used this symbol, but he passed it off as V for victory when he was, in fact, flashing the sign of Cain to the world. The family of Cain is firmly in control of Earth and are definitely fighting the other side. Cain representing the sun worshippers, the other side representing the moon worshippers. The sun cult battling the moon cult. But both, as I said, Brotherhood of the Snake in previous shows, when it has to be done, they agree. Because they are both in it for the same reason, world domination, and are getting very, very close to it. That's what these rituals are all about, to push us closer and closer to that one world government. It was a little over 8 years since the flights of Gagarin and Alan Shepard, followed quickly by President Kennedy's challenge to put a man on the moon before that decade was out, 1960s. The British invasion year, when the world just went crazy. Now, Apollo 9 followed Apollo 8, which was sort of a dress rehearsal, no landing. Apollo 9 is the third manned mission of the Apollo program. It was a test of the lunar module, and Apollo 10 supposedly orbited the moon, and the lunar module actually separated and descended to 10 kilometers from the surface of the moon, but did not land. And they want us to believe that they actually reversed it and came back to Earth in the lunar module. It's just absolutely incredible what they want us to believe. But they have video proof, which has since been destroyed. I'll get to that in just a moment. With Hollywood stepping in to save the day, of course. So, this set the world up. 9 and 10. Actually, Apollo 8, 9, and 10 set the world up for Apollo 11. Remember, with the Illuminati, the number 11 is assigned to any event that will directly lead to the rising of the Antichrist. And so Apollo 11 was the flight to put the first man on the moon. Now, on the morning of July 16th, 40 years ago this past Wednesday, on the very day before the new NASA director, along with his new deputy administrator, were unanimously confirmed by the American Congress and Senate, Apollo 11 astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were sitting atop another Saturn V launch at Complex 39A at the Kennedy Space Center, the three-stage, 363-foot rocket. That's a hidden three, meaning royalty, by the way. Royalty lifting these three men, again, will use its 7.5 million pounds of thrust to propel them into space and onto the moon. So as I was saying, on the morning of July 16th, 40 years ago this past Wednesday, they lifted off. This past Wednesday, July 16th, 2009, the administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, the highest-ranked official of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, changed. President Barack Obama, his nomination of Charles Bolden as NASA Administrator, an African-American, and Lori Garver as Deputy NASA Administrator, were both respectively, upon their successful confirmation by the Congress and Senate, were installed at the head. It's an incredible coincidence, you'd like to say, that we have, on the very day of the 40th anniversary of the launch, new space agency heads, the administrator and the deputy administrator. No coincidence. It was held off until then so that it could be done. We have a former Marine now, General Bolden, taking over the space agency, and his associate administrator of policy and plans is a woman, Lori Beth Garver, who was, I believe, part of the White House staff. And Barack Obama picked her, along with Charles Bolden, to run NASA. As he said, there would be a lot of changes in NASA, and I did a show with Obama and Gus Grissom, the blood sacrifice of the very first Apollo. That was Apollo 1. We actually didn't even name it Apollo 1, but when they fried those three men, they did rename it Apollo 1. Bolden, as I said, a former Marine, so it's obvious that there are plans for the Army to take over the rocket program for future launches. General Bolden's a veteran of 4 space flights. He's logged over 680 hours in space. He was a pilot on the Space Shuttle Columbia, Space Shuttle Atlantis, and he flew the Space Shuttle Discovery also. This was all in the 80s and early 90s. Space, back with more on the 40th anniversary of Apollo 11 as we get into the flight details next on AM 640 and View from Space. Just getting started.
The opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of AM 640. He goes deeper into today's headlines than anyone else dares to go. But you can take it. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on AM 640.
I'm the guy they call Space. This is A View from Space on AM 640. Just about to go over the Apollo 11 flight details. First of all, I'd like to give out my email addresses. space@640toronto.com or spaceman@640toronto.com. DE writes, subject line only, nothing in the body. Did they really land on the moon? ... Many reasons to be skeptical. Well, you're right, DE, and you're going to hear them all, starting now. At 9:32 Eastern Daylight Time, the engines fire. Apollo 11 clears the tower at launch pad 39A. There's only 2 launch pads, by the way, at Kennedy Space Center or Cape Canaveral, whichever one you prefer. It's 39A and 39B. Why 2 39s? Because you say 3 times 13 is 39. It's numerology. It has to leave from that particular numerology. 3 is the highest magnification possible for a number to reach its maximum potential to create the black magic spell. That is why Launch Complex 39A and Launch Complex 39B exist at the Kennedy Space Center. It was a 3-stage, 363-foot rocket. That's a hidden 3, meaning royalty again. At 9:32, as I said, it cleared. After 1.5 orbits, Apollo 11 gets a go for what mission controllers in Houston call translunar injection. In other words, it's time to head for the moon. And now, I want to make something quite clear here. The reason that the Kennedy Space Center, and a lot of people have inquired about this when I've done NASA shows on space flights. Why is it that the Kennedy Space Center is the point for liftoff, but the control center is in Houston? Well, it's simple. We have to have 2 points on the ground and join it with the 1 point in the sky where we're going, and you have the magical triangle. The most holy symbol of Freemasonry and the Illuminati. The pyramid. 4 triangles. 4, of course, the number of foundation. That's what a pyramid is. It's 4 triangles laid up against each other. And that is basically pyramid power. Yes, you know it in business if you're in business. The money goes in from the top out the left pocket, down into the masses, and back up into the right pocket, because if you're at the top of the pyramid, you get everything returned to you. And that's exactly why it is a holy shape for them. And that's exactly why it lifts off from the Kennedy Space Center to the point in the sky where it is or is going, and it forms the 3-sided figure as we go to Houston control. Now you know. So, it's time to head for the moon as they get the go. in the mission for the translunar injection, what they call. 3 days later, the crew is in lunar orbit. They went 1.5 orbits around the Earth, okay, and then slingshotted 240,000 miles to the moon. How they could, you know how you take a marble and you put it in a round pan and you spin it and it gets up speed and then you release it and it goes like zing. How the hell is NASA going to hit the moon going 1.5 times around and then doing the translunar injection? You know what it's like? It's tantamount to hitting a golf ball in Vancouver, British Columbia, and getting a hole-in-one in Tokyo. That's about how far-fetched it is to go 1.5 times revolution around the Earth and then slingshot to the moon. But if you have the video evidence of them landing on it, who's going to question it? If you don't check out what is in the science, and they pass it off as science, it can actually be black magic passed off as science. Because most people don't know, and don't check, and are not educated enough to understand the physics. So the 3 days in a straight line, I guess, toward the moon, it gets into a lunar orbit. Okay, if you bought that much, a day after that, Armstrong and Aldrin climb into the lunar module Eagle and begin the descent. 4. Notice that? 4 days. The number of foundation. Because this is what's going to lay the foundation in everyone's mind that man can travel in outer space and man can do interstellar travel. So if man can do interstellar travel, then who's to say there isn't a more intelligent race out there that knows even more than us and can do even more? And that today is a statement that millions and millions have bought. If we can do it, there's obviously a smarter race out there. And those are the extraterrestrials. And believe me, that's what the show is going to be about when I told you about the technology at the International Space Station and the configuration of satellites around the world that are now being set up with the hardware and software to turn our skies into motion picture theater screens, to project incredible images that will absolutely fool you, deceive you into thinking what is not actually happening is happening, just like they can do in a theater. But when you're sitting in the theater, you're going, I know it's not real because I'm in a theater. But if it's happening above you, above your house, you're going to go, oh my God, it's real. We've got some exciting times coming up. Hold on tight. So, one day after that, Armstrong and Aldrin climb into the lunar module Eagle and begin the descent while Collins orbits in the command module Columbia. He sees no pictures, only audio. And they are not there, but I'll get to that. Collins later writes that Eagle is the weirdest looking contraption I have ever seen in the sky. But it will prove its worth, so they say. You know why he said that? Because there's no way in the world this thing could fly. Ever been to the Smithsonian Institute and seen it? The LEM, the lunar module? It's worth the trip. It's an education. It will break down a lot of the Illuminati programming that's in your mind if you actually saw what they say they went to the moon with and landed on. So when it come time to set Eagle down in this sea of tranquility, Armstrong improvises. Now they're going to tell you that Neil Armstrong actually manually pilots the ship past an area littered with boulders, picks a landing spot during the final seconds of descent. As Eagle's computers are sounding alarms, and it turns out to be a simple case, by the way, the computer trying to do too many things at once, but as Aldrin later pointed out, unfortunately it came up when we did not want to be trying to solve these other particular problems. These were distractions to keep the crew as busy as possible by NASA, you understand, because these people were on drugs. I'm talking about psychotropic drugs that can actually distort reality so much that what you are actually going through you actually believe is happening, and it's a reality. And that's what these gentlemen were under. And of course they were kept very busy and distracted constantly, even fooling the 3 astronauts that they were in fact landing on the moon. It's either that or these are the 3 people that know the truth. I believe that. Later on, because we had not just these 2 on Apollo 11 walk on the moon. We had 10 others. There were 12 people walking on the moon. So they'll have us believe. 12. I'll get into that later. So, when the lunar module lands at 4:18 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. You recognize 4:18 the time? It is a hidden 13. 8 and 1, 9, plus 4, 13. 4:18 p.m. Only 30 seconds of fuel remains. There's the number of royalty once again. All the numbers are laid in incessantly. Armstrong radios, Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Mission Control erupts in celebration as the tension breaks, and a controller tells the crew, "You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again." Armstrong will later confirm that the landing was his biggest concern, saying the unknowns were rampant. I'll say. And there were just 1,000 things to worry about. Yes, they kept Neil Armstrong very busy as the pilot of that lunar module. Space back with more in a moment. On the 40th anniversary of the faked moon mission called Apollo 11.
The ancient mystery religions, numerology, the Holy Grail decoded, and he goes deeper than a black hole into today's headlines. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on AM 640.
I'm the guy they call Space. This is A View from Space. It's AM 640. You can email me at space@640toronto.com or spaceman@640toronto.com. I'm covering tonight the 40th anniversary of Apollo 11, going through the flight details on Neil Armstrong, the first man, they say, supposedly, to walk on the moon, and this, what it sounded like on that July 20th day in 1969.
Okay, engine stop. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
And there you have it. The eagle, by the way, the ancient Roman Empire's symbol, the German symbol, the ancient Babylonian symbol, the phoenix actually, because that's what the eagle is now, is the hidden phoenix, really. And Iraq has the eagle. There are so many old regimes in the world that have had the eagle as their symbol. The very first time the eagle was picked as a symbol, it was for the family of Cain. Cain chose it because he is the son of the serpent, Satan himself. And of course, what better way to disguise yourself, if you're a serpent, is to have the symbol of the serpent eater, the eagle. And that is why America today has the eagle. And that is why NASA and the Illuminati have picked that name for the weirdest looking contraption Collins had ever seen. Yes, he couldn't even believe it was going to fly. At 10:56 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Armstrong is ready to plant the first human foot on another world, make history, indelibly imprint for all around the world that man could now do interstellar travel. So if we could, what about other beings from other worlds? This is what it sounded like with more than 500 million people watching on television as he climbs down the ladder. And I want you to know that Neil Armstrong has to be directed at this point, because remember, these men are under some kind of psychotropic drug and are also performing for the cameras.
Surface is fine and powdery. I can pick it up loosely with my toe. It does adhere in fine layers, like powdered charcoal, to the sole and inside of my boot. I only go in small fraction of an inch, maybe an eighth of an inch, but I can see the footprints of my boots and the treads and the fine sandy particles. Yeah, this is Houston, we're copying.
It's Neil Armstrong describing the scene and his footprints as he steps on the moon for the very first time. Aldrin joins him shortly after and offers a simple but powerful description of the lunar surface. He calls it magnificent desolation. They supposedly explore the surface for 2.5 hours, collecting samples and taking photographs. They're actually leaping around the set at either Area 51 or Roswell, New Mexico, or another place in Nevada. That no one has ever been able to nail down. 3 places, either Area 51, where it was recorded, Roswell, New Mexico, or in the desert of Nevada. They leave behind an American flag, a patch honoring the fallen Apollo 1 crew, which I remarked earlier was Gus Grissom, the blood sacrifice that was shed for the ritual's success and the black magic spell to take hold in people's minds. And of a plaque of the eagle's legs. It reads, "Here, men, from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon. July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." And you notice now he's uniting the world in peace with this mission, with a sign on the eagle, the symbol of Cain. Apollo 1 was the official name of the later destroyed by fire test and training exercise on January 27th of 1967 at Pad 34 on Launch Complex 34 before it became Launch Pad number 39A. It was atop a Saturn 1B rocket. 1B, of course, is 3. The Saturn is for Satan. 1 and B, the second letter of the alphabet, is 3. So there's your royalty once again on Apollo 1, which was not originally called Apollo 1. Command pilot Virgil Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, all 3 died in the fire. Of course, fire being the symbol of the sun. They had to die that way because it was for the sun worshippers that this blood sacrifice was done on Apollo 1 for the eventual success of Apollo 11, convincing everyone in the world they had landed on the moon and that interstellar travel by man was possible. It wasn't about a Russian space race whatsoever. If you look at the Russian space program and the American space program all through that 60s era, you will have found that the Russians concentrated on going up and sitting and spending time there, as well as getting a rocket that could lift heavy weights. Great thrust. But the Americans were interested in up and back, up and back, up and back, up and back, little bursts. So you notice you put the 2 space programs together and no one's duplicating each other's work. Therefore, the expense is cut down considerably, and they can get it done quicker. One is out there trained to sit, and the other one is trained to go up and back, up and back, up and back. A perfect combination. You pit one against the other and call it the race for the moon. And that's how they sold it to the world. We have to beat the Russians. Why? Billions and billions of dollars were taken out of the taxpayer and used against them high above us. Armstrong and Aldrin blasted off and docked with Collins in Columbia. Collins later says that for the first time he really felt that they were going to carry this thing off. See, he really didn't believe they were going to go. But he had to make a statement because these guys are having to face the press. They're military men who now actually have to act as rock stars. Those are 2 totally different mindsets. A military man is someone who keeps his secrets, who tells no one anything, who is programmed to do a job and to execute that job and to forget about it. A rock star is there to ask all questions and get praise heaped on him. This clashed with these 3 men. They did not know how to handle it because they were military men, brainwashed to sell the world on interstellar travel. And they were chosen to be the spokespersons for NASA and the rest of the Illuminati, being the first man to walk on the moon. The crew splashes down off Hawaii July 24th. It's all over. 9 days. It's all it took. 9 quick days. Kennedy's challenge had been met. Men from Earth have walked on the moon and returned home safely. You know what? About 9 months later, they went again. No, excuse me. About 4 months later, they went again. In November, Apollo 12 took off and walked on the moon also. How about that? a situation where they went, there's 0.00017 chance of man getting to the moon, much less walking on it. And they do it twice in less than 4 months. All of a sudden, things changed around in a hurry, didn't they? And in an interview years later, Armstrong praises the hundreds of thousands of people behind the project. Every guy that's setting up the tests, cranking the torque wrench, and so on, is saying, man or woman, if anything goes wrong here, it's not going to be my fault. He tried to express to everyone that there was a great team behind him. But guess what? The people at NASA, you don't have to fool these people very much, because all they're looking at is monitors. They're inside of a building looking at a television screen. All you have to do is program them the images from the studio lot, which I will be getting to in a few moments. And you have convinced the guys working at NASA that they've actually landed on the moon also. And that's why they believed it themselves, and there had to be no cover-up with the NASA people that were working at the Kennedy Space Center and at Mission Control. Only a few people needed to know the truth on a need-to-know basis, as the Illuminati always works. Space back with more in a moment. On the 40th anniversary of the flight of the hoax called Apollo 11, the moon landing.
The opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of AM 640.
Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon on this July 20th, 1969.
Deprogramming the brainwashed simply by uncovering the truth. He's the spaceman with a view from space on AM 640.
I'm the guy that calls space. It's View from Space on AM 640. You can email me at space@640toronto.com or spaceman@640toronto.com. JF writes, following you right along, Space, I believe I saw clippings where they were trying to fly the Eagle on the ground, and the thing was so unstable, I believe they crashed some landers. And that is absolutely true, they did. Jay writes, my father worked for Inco in Sudbury, and he said the astronauts were training to walk on the moon at the Inco properties in the late 60s or early 70s. That's when they had 4 years of space flights, 1969 to 1972, were the manned moon missions with man walking on it. They said they were training there because they said Sudbury landscape was similar to the moon. And possibly some of the footage is even in there. Who knows? You just heard Walter Cronkite. At the time, the CBS newscaster and the network newscaster extraordinaire, the most trusted man in America, delivered those words. The 38-year-old Neil Armstrong. Did you notice that? 8 and 3 is in 11. So Walter Cronkite got his 11 in there in his small little piece when he announced that the men had landed on the moon. And when you have the man that 99.9 Americans trusted as the truth, when you have him saying it, it's a done deal. Especially when it's followed by the video. Faked though it was, it is a very compelling case put forth by NASA for man to have successfully gone to the moon, landed on the moon, and walked on the moon. Over the next 3.5 years, 10 astronauts will follow in these men's footsteps. How about that? The next 3.5 years, just 4 years, was all it took for them to indelibly stamp on every little person and every old person in the entire world's mind that man can do interstellar travel. Gene Cernan, commander of the last Apollo mission, leaves the lunar surface with these words. This was in the final Apollo moonwalking mission. He said, I quote, "We leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return with peace and hope for all mankind." Now, is not Barack Obama selling the hope again? Yes, he is. And the peace? Yes, he is. He's now the commander-in-chief of NASA and has picked 2 new leaders. And strangely enough, but history repeating itself again, out of the blue, all of a sudden, Obama has to make this Walter Cronkite reference today. Yes, he did. Do you know what he said about Walter Cronkite? He had to evoke the past because Walter Cronkite was the man most trusted in America that delivered the biggest lie America ever swallowed, that man landed and walked on the moon. He said of Walter Cronkite, he was the voice of certainty in a world of uncertainty. Just that one quick, silly little quote, but the White House made sure that it got out this week. Because Walter Cronkite had a lot to do with convincing the world America was successful in their moonwalk. Which brings me now to the proof that they walked on the moon. They showed us videos. I lived through it. I watched them. I looked at it and I went, my God. How do we know that's the moon? I mean, I'm in Saskatchewan at this point. I got a huge antenna up in the height of my house, on the roof. And all nights, okay, I'm going to give you out of a month, I'll get 3 days of television reception. 3 days out there with that antenna. It'd be too snowy. And this is what it would sound like a lot of time. I just turn it off. There's nothing on. It's just snow and no sound. It's just that white noise. And I'm thinking, I can't even pick up the channel clearly on Earth. And they're picking up pictures from the moon 240,000 miles from Earth through the Van Allen belt, the radiation belt that surrounds us and keeps us locked in to our low Earth orbit in our little corner of the universe. So that's how it struck me. There's a kid who can't pick up the local television station very often, and these guys are getting pics from the moon. Yeah, right. So this comes out on the 17th, which was Friday. NASA could put a man on the moon, but didn't have the sense to keep the original video of the live TV transmission. Let me read you the headline again. NASA could put a man on the moon, but didn't have the sense to keep the original video of the live TV transmission. In an embarrassing acknowledgement, NASA said Thursday that it must have erased the Apollo 11 moon footage years ago so that it could reuse the videotape. Now, what would you like to videotape over top of history? Oh, I don't know. How about a truck leaving the compound? Huh? For security reasons. That would be good. You could erase history for that. That's important enough. How ridiculous. How stupid do they think we are? NASA's embarrassed. They erased the first man walking on the moon so they could reuse the videotape. But Now Hollywood comes riding to the rescue. I can't wait to see this. Can you? The studio wizards, yeah, let's bring out the druids, who restored Casablanca, are digitally sharpening and cleaning up the ghostly graining footage of the moon landing, making it even better than it was on television on July 20th in 1969. They are doing it by working from 4 copies that NASA scrounged up from around the world. Way to go, NASA! Way to dig in the archives of everybody else's junk and find the footage you accidentally erased. No, sorry. It wasn't even an accident. They erased it so they could reuse the videotape. My God, we've got to be gullible. The first batch of restored footage was released just in time for the 40th anniversary. No. Yes, just in time. One giant leap for mankind. And some of the details seem new because of their sharpness. Originally, astronaut Neil Armstrong's face visor, too fuzzy to be seen clearly. The upgraded video of Earth's first moonwalker shows the visor and the reflection on it. And here comes the number 23. Are you ready how they figure this out and work it in? The number 23, by the way, for the Illuminati is the number, for instance, there are 23 chromosomes make up a human being. There are so many 23s that are like so ingrained in the human being and so important, tantamount to the human race. That's why 23 is such a big number. It's $230,000 refurbishing. That's how they fit the number 23 in. $230,000 refurbishing price to be paid. It's only 3 weeks into a month-long project, and only 40% of the work has been done already, but it does show improvements in 4 snippets that are on the internet for you to consume now and to start to believe again. Armstrong walking down the ladder has been retouched. Buzz Aldrin following him, retouched. The 2 astronauts reading a plaque they left on the moon, retouched. And the planting of the flag on the lunar surface, retouched. I bet you this time they don't have it flat, though, the flag waving in the wind. Can you believe it? No atmosphere on the moon, but the flag is moving because there's a breeze in the original footage. I wonder what the $230,000 refurbished one looks like. Can't wait to see it. Space back with more in a moment on AM 640.
Extreme radio for extreme times. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on AM 640.
I'm the guy they call Space. This is A View from Space on AM 640. I'm going through the 40th anniversary of the Apollo 11 lunar landing and subsequent spacewalk. I'm sorry, moonwalk. Large difference. As I said, there's been an embarrassing acknowledgement by NASA this past Thursday. They waited until the 40th anniversary to say that they have actually, not accidentally, but on purpose, erased the Apollo 11 moon footage, television videotape, so that they could reuse the videotape. I guess they don't have enough money coming in at NASA. I guess the budget's not big enough in those days. The original videos beamed to Earth were stored on giant reels of tape that each contained 15 minutes of video along with other data from the moon. In the 70s and 80s, NASA had a shortage of the tapes, so it erased about 200,000 of them and reused them as their excuse. How did NASA end up looking like a bumbling idiot, taping over its wedding video with the Super Bowl? Napster who was in charge of the live television recordings back in the Apollo years, said they were mostly thought of as data tapes. It wasn't his job to preserve history, he said, just to make sure the footage worked. He said in retrospect he wished NASA hadn't reused the tapes. No kidding. But it wasn't his job to preserve history. You would think that logic alone would make that decision for you. Hey, Natsker, I need some videotape. Mind if I erase these old Apollo 11 moonwalking ones? Yeah, go ahead. It's not my job to keep history. Oh, you know, on second thought, I guess after, we might have saved those. That would have been a cool thing. Oh, well. No, I can't believe that kind of thing went down. Sorry, just not going to believe it. Not going to be that gullible. I'm not that stupid. And of course, outside historians were aghast. The restored video is phony. It is covering up gross errors of the original phony tapings on the fake moon set rigged up in Area 51 or in Nevada desert or Roswell, New Mexico, where the hell they did it. Now those gaffes have been retouched. Can't wait to see them. No, for sure the flag's not going to be flapping. Some other things that I'm going to cover. Video evidence that it was a hoax that will also be erased. It's surprising to me that NASA didn't have the common sense to save perhaps the most important historical footage of the 20th century, says Rice University historian and author Douglas Brinkley. He noted that the NASA organization saved all sorts of data and artifacts from Apollo 11, and it's mind-boggling that the tapes of the moonwalk just disappeared. Yes, they have other stuff that's not relevant at all. But the goods, the original copies that were shown to the 60s people in 1969 on that July 20th day, are destroyed. The remastered copies may look good, he says, but when dealing with historical film footage, you always want the original to study it. No kidding. We want the original so we can prove it's a fake. Now they don't exist. They're going to be replaced by the new ones. Believe me, they have the old ones. I just don't want to show them to you anymore. They are yanking them. It was a mistake. No doubt about that, Lonius says. This is a problem inside the entire federal government, he said. They don't think that preservation is all that important. Yeah, he's blaming it on the government. When NASA is a private corporation. Yes, it's funded by the government and gets a budget by them, but it is a private corporation, just as the Federal Reserve Bank is. Lanius said federal warehouses where historical artifacts are saved are kind of like the last scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It just goes away in this place with other big boxes. The company that's restored all the Indiana Jones movies, including Raiders, is the one bailing out NASA. Lowry Digital of Burbank, California, says that Casablanca had a pixel count of 10 times higher than the moon video, meaning that the Apollo 11 footage was fuzzier than the vintage movie and more of a challenge in one sense. All of the video the company has dealt with, this by far and away the lowest quality, he says. And Nafsker, the NASA man that is responsible for those tapes, praised Lowry for restoring crispness to the Apollo video. And it's supposedly a little better than the original. It's not a lot better, but it's a little better. Which is basically just a cover-up for what we did is we took out the stuff that people have been talking about for the last 40 years on it was a fake. So if we just fix that up, the next generation will believe it. The other ones will have doubts, yeah, but it's the new ones we're after anyway. Not those old people. They're going to die soon anyway. The Apollo 11 video remains in black and white, Inchel said. He said he would never consider colorizing it, as he has done to black and white in classic movies. And he said the moon is mostly gray anyway. Right. How would he know? The guy works for Hollywood. What? He's an expert on the color of the moon? As you're standing on the surface? The restoration used for four video sources. CBS News originals, kinescopes from the National Archives, and a video from Australia that received the transmission of the original moon video and camera shots of a TV monitor. Both Nafsker and Inchal acknowledged that the digitally remastering the video could further encourage conspiracy theorists like me. Well, actually, I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all. I'm actually more about getting to the truth. The real conspiracies are cleverly disguised as newscasts and information on the Illuminati-controlled multimedia. Anyway, people like me who believe NASA faked the entire moon landing on a Hollywood set. But they said they enhanced the video as conservatively as possible. NASA did not lose other Apollo mission videos, by the way, because they weren't stored on that type of tape and they needed to be reused. As part of the moon's landing 40th anniversary, the space agency has been trotting out archival material. NASA has a website from audio with private conversations, the lunar module, and command capsules. The agency is also webcasting radio from Apollo 11 as if the mission were taking place today. They've really done a bang-up job of recreating the hoax in hopes of convincing everyone that, hey, they really did go to the moon now. Because that's really what their battle is about. It's not whether people are aware that they went to the moon. It's whether the people believe that they did or not. Because there are a lot of people now, millions and millions, that do not actually believe it. One of the large reasons why let me just put it very succinctly, the moon, Earth, you can't get there from here. How is it possible for manned space flights to survive the effects of the Van Allen radiation belt? See, as you may or may not be aware, the Van Allen radiation belts are donut-shaped regions encircling Earth and contain high-energy electrons and ions trapped in the Earth's magnetic field. Explorer 1, for example, launched by NASA in 1958, discovered these two regions of intense radiation surrounding the Earth. They are referred to as the inner and outer Van Allen radiation belts, after James Van Allen, who designed Explorer 1. The inner region is centered at about 3,000 clicks out above Earth. It has a thickness of about 5,000 clicks. So once you hit the 3,000 kilometer level above Earth, you hit the Van Allen belt, and you got to travel for about 5,000 more clicks to get through it. The outer region is centered at about 15,000 to 20,000 kilometers above the face of the Earth and has a thickness of 6,000 to 10,000 kilometers. So you can see how it is quite impossible to penetrate the Van Allen belt. Typically, manned spaceflight, such as the shuttle, stays well below the altitude of the Van Allen radiation belts. Say, flight can occur below altitudes of, say, 1,000 miles or so. Typically, manned spaceflight, such as the shuttle again, stays well below the altitude. So, what do we do when we have to fly through the radiation belts? Like when we went to the moon or sent probes to other planets? Well, you would have to build a machine with protection devices for radiation, which means lead. And do you realize how thick that lead would have to be to penetrate, as not to penetrate, for a 5,000-kilometer journey? Constant radiation pelting for 5,000 clicks. Remember, the ISS is only 220 clicks straight up. You got to go through 5,000 kilometers of high, intense radiation in the Van Allen belt. There is no possible way. I'll tell you how that was found to be next when I return on View from Space on AM 640, covering the 40th anniversary of the faked moon landing and walk.
The opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of AM 640. The ancient mystery religions, numerology, the Holy Grail decoded, and he goes deeper than a black hole into today's headlines. This is A View from Space with the Spaceman on AM 640.
Spaceman on AM 640 at The View from Space. Emails at space@640toronto.com or spaceman@640toronto.com. This realization was sparked by one key person now, 80 years old, who worked as a senior position on the Apollo program. He said that it was impossible for any spacecraft with humans on board to go any further than Earth orbit because of lethal solar radiation, and that the moon missions were falsified to fool us about United States strategic capability. Pretty preposterous, right? And then I discovered that NASA's administrator resigned just days before the first Apollo mission. That 2 of the 3 astronauts of Apollo 11 refused to ever give any interviews to anyone. And that some pictures supposedly taken on the moon's surface contain shadows that intersect with each other. The sun always casts parallel shadows. That means there was some other source of lighting on the moon. And of course, the cameras carried by the astronauts carried no other lighting apparatus, or they either shot it in a studio to get that effect. You'd think it couldn't possibly have been a fraud, could it? Research from evidence at NASA uncovered a mislabeled, unedited outtakes reel from the Apollo 11 mission that is dated by NASA's own atomic clock as being taken 3 days into the flight. Identified on camera are Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. They're doing multiple takes of a single shot of a mission. That because having the evidence of the uncovered, unedited version proves the photography to be completely fraudulent. Really? It means they did not go to the moon, and they did not walk on the moon, obviously. See, NASA was created to make interstellar travel believable. The Apollo space program foisted the idea that man could travel to and walk upon the moon. Every Apollo mission was carefully rehearsed and then filmed in large sound stages at the Atomic Energy Commission top secret test site, either in Nevada desert, as I said, Roswell, New Mexico, or the third place, Area 51, and in a secured and guarded soundstage, where they had a huge scale mock-up of the moon. All names, missions, landing sites, and events of the Apollo space program echoed in the occult metaphors, rituals, symbology of the Illuminati's secret religion. The most transparent was the faked explosion of the spacecraft Apollo 13, named Aquarius, New Age, at 1:13. 1313 military time, on April 13th, 1970, which was the metaphor for the initiation ceremony involving the death, explosion, placement of the coffin, period of uncertainty of their survival, communion with the spiritual world, and the imparting of the esoteric knowledge to the candidate, orbit and observation of the moon without physical contact, rebirth of the initiate, solution of the problem and repairs, and the raising up of the phoenix, the new age of Aquarius, by the grip of the lion's paw, re-entry and recovery of Apollo 13. 13 is the number of rebirth, death, and reincarnation, sacrifice, the phoenix, the Christ, perfected soul imprisoned in matter, and the transition from the old to the new. Another revelation to those who understand the symbolic language of the Illuminati is the hidden meaning of the names of all of the space shuttles that are included in this one sentence, which is the mission statement for the Illuminati and their space programs. It is and listen for each and every single space shuttle name. It is a Columbian enterprise to endeavor for the discovery of Atlantis. And all challengers will be destroyed. And, of course, Challenger was destroyed. Exploration of the moon stopped because it was impossible to continue the hoax without being ultimately discovered. And, of course, they ran out of pre-filmed episodes. No man has ever ascended higher than 1,000 miles above the Earth's surface. No man has ever orbited, landed on, or walked upon the moon in any publicly known space program because, you see, it can't be done. The Russians tried to do it. The Russians, in their closed system, where they didn't have to report any single launch or any space program, they fried, I don't know how many, it would be countless numbers of men trying to get through the Van Allen belt. But when they finally figured it out, even the strongest rocket, the biggest thrust that they could possibly do, still wasn't enough because their astronauts never came back. They were fried in outer space in the Van Allen belt. You can't get there from here. So that's when both sides of the space program in Russia and America realized it's as far as we can go. Up about 3,000 kilometers, you hit the oven. The tremendous radiation encountered in the Van Allen belt, solar radiation, cosmic radiation, temperature control, and many other problems connected with space travel prevent living organisms leaving our atmosphere with our known level of technology. Any intelligent high school student with a basic physics book can prove NASA faked the Apollo moon landings. That's why the videos had to be refurbished, is their word. If you doubt this, please explain how the astronauts walked upon the moon's surface enclosed in a spacesuit in full sunlight, absorbing a minimum of 265 degrees of heat, surrounded by a vacuum. NASA tells you that the moon has no atmosphere and that the astronauts were surrounded by the vacuum of space. Heat is defined as the vibration or movement of molecules within matter. The faster the molecule motion, the higher the temperature, correct? The slower the molecular motion, the colder the temperature. Absolute zero is that point where all molecular motion ceases. In order to have hot or cold molecules, must be present. See, if you don't have any molecules, you don't have any hot, and you don't have any cold. A vacuum is a condition of nothingness, where there are no molecules. NASA, remember, tells us that the moon is a vacuum. Vacuums exist in degrees. Some scientists tell you that there is no such thing as an absolute vacuum. Space is the closest thing to an absolute vacuum that's known to us. There are so few molecules present in the areas of what we know as space that any concept of hot or cold is impossible to measure. A vacuum is a perfect insulator. That's why a thermos or a vacuum bottle is used to store hot or cold liquids in order to maintain the temperatures for the longest time possible without reheating or recooling. Radiation of all types will travel through a vacuum but will not affect the vacuum. Radiant heat from the sun travels through the vacuum of space but does not warm space because there are no molecules in a vacuum. In fact, the radiant heat of the sun has no effect whatsoever until it strikes matter. Molecular movement will increase in direct proportion to the radiant energy which is absorbed by the matter. The time it takes to heat matter exposed to direct sunlight in space is determined by its color, the elemental properties, its distance from the sun, and its rate of absorption of radiant energy. Space is not hot. Space is not cold. Spaceman, AM 640 in A View from Space. Objects which are heated cannot be cooled by space. In order for an object to cool, it must first be removed from direct sunlight. Objects which are in the shadow of another object would eventually cool, but not because space is cold. Space is not cold. Hot and cold do not exist in a vacuum. Objects cool because the laws of motion dictate that the molecules of the object will slow down due to the resistance resulting from striking other molecules until eventually all motion will stop, provided the object is sheltered from the direct or indirect radiation of the sun and that there's no other source of heat. Now, since the vacuum of space is the perfect insulator, objects take a very long time to cool, even when removed from all sources of heat, radiated or otherwise. NASA insists the spacesuits the astronauts supposedly wore on the lunar surface were air-conditioned. An air conditioner cannot and will not work without a heat exchanger. A heat exchanger simply takes the heat gathered in a medium, such as a freon, from one place and transfers it to another place. This requires a medium of molecules which can absorb and transfer the heat, such as an atmosphere or water. That's what it requires. An air conditioner will not and cannot work in a vacuum. A spacesuit surrounded by a vacuum cannot transfer heat from the inside of the suit to any other place. The vacuum, remember, is a perfect insulator. A man would roast in his suit in such a circumstance. NASA claims the spacesuits were cooled by a water system, which was piped around the body, then through a system of coils sheltered from the sun in the backpack. NASA claims that water was sprayed on the coils, causing a coating of ice to form. The ice then supposedly absorbed the tremendous heat collected in the water and evaporated into space. I got a couple of problems with that. It can't be explained away when I return on AM 640. This is A View from Space. That's all it is. On the 40th anniversary of the moon landing hoax.